The end times, are they scary? Fascinating? Or is it something that you're kind of fairly indifferent to? Our computer is clearly indifferent to it. There we are, yes. I can't see them on the screen. Is that how we feel about it? Well, nothing is quite doing what it should be doing today, it seems. Some people don't want to talk about the end times at all. You can go to churches where they never mention it. Because it kind of seems a bit scary, doesn't it, sometimes? And sometimes confusing, because there's a lot of different opinions about it. It's one of these areas where theologians and pastors and, YouTube influencers disagree a lot. You can find a lot of different opinions and thoughts about it. So I'm going to start by saying that there is a lot we don't know, and maybe the details don't matter that much, but it is still an important topic, because the main topic, the main aspect of it all, is very much part of the good news. Jesus is coming back. That is what it's all about. The end times. It's about Jesus coming back. And the New Testament talks a lot about it. And I was going to say this at the beginning. This is possibly one of the first, if not the first sermons that I preach here in Redditch, where I expect that some of you will disagree with me. Which is fine. It's okay to disagree with me, as long as you don't disagree with the Bible. And I want to make that distinction quite clear from the beginning. So some of you may disagree with some of the things I'm saying today. That's fine, just make sure you're not disagreeing with the Bible as well. And if you think I'm disagreeing with the Bible, please come and tell me. But the New Testament does talk a lot about the second coming, the return of Christ, Jesus coming back. There's one example in Colossians. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Jesus himself talks about it. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. And you hopefully remember that Jesus left earth. We celebrated that at Ascension. And when he did, there were these angels, and they made a point of saying that this same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way that you've seen him go into heaven. The New Testament is full of it. The Lord is coming back. And we have this church chant that we may not do very often as Baptists, but you will come across it every now and again. You know, Christ died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. This has been the confession of the church for 2,000 years. And even though there may be a lot of different theories about exactly what that means and what exactly is going to happen, there's one thing that is certain: Jesus is coming back. And I think there are a few other things that we can be fairly confident about as well. And it's one of them. When it's going to happen, we don't know. And we're not meant to know. And I think that is fairly clear from what Jesus says. About that day or hour, no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, only the Father. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. We're not meant to know, which is why I find it so baffling that there are so many people who have tried to calculate it anyway. I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses they kind of were born as a movement out of an attempt to calculate the end times. Some of you might have seen these. Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet Earth. How many read that? Oh, okay, fair enough. And the billboards proclaiming that Judgment Day was happening on the 21st of May 2011. It didn't, in case you weren't aware. And I discovered that Wikipedia has a whole page with failed date setters. I mean, that's quite a lot, isn't it? AD 500, AD 1260, 1694, 1964, just swap the two digits around, 2011, or Isaac Newton's prediction, which I can't say yet if he was wrong or right, because he said that Jesus would come back in 2060. So then we still have 36 years to wait to see if he was right or wrong. And I was a bit sad to discover that even John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church and Wesleyan churches, ventured to predict that Jesus would come back in 1836, which just goes to show that even good theologians can make silly mistakes, because we are all fallible. So please don't fall for any of these calculations. There's only two things we can say for certain. It will happen, but if anybody tells you that they've worked out when it will happen, they are wrong. That we can know for certain. Okay, how is Jesus coming back? Well, a very important answer here, visibly. That's where the Jehovah's Witnesses went wrong, because they say he came back invisibly. And he actually came back already in 2014. I mean, I don't think I need to kind of refute that very strongly. The angels in Acts 1 stated that this same Jesus who has been taken from you will come back in the same way you've seen him going to heaven. He stepped out of the material world into heaven, the spiritual sphere, which is why he kind of disappeared from sight. He will come back in the same way. He'll step out of heaven, out of the spiritual sphere, if you like, back into our material world. So it's not going to be like Christmas. It's not going to come back as a baby in a kind of remote corner where nobody notices. When he comes back, it will be visible, every eye shall see him, and it's the same Jesus coming back. Some fanciful interpreters have suggested that next time he's going to come back as a black woman, for example, just to kind of make a big contrast. I mean, I wouldn't mind, but it's very clear that it's the same Jesus, a Middle Eastern man. The same Jesus that was crucified for us, that rose from the dead, the same Jesus coming back. So that's quite important, apparently. I would have thought it was a given, but there we are. So what is always a good question to ask. What will happen now? That is an interesting question. How many of you have heard the term the rapture? No, not too many. Well, that's good, because you don't really need it. But in certain circles, the rapture is talked about as if it was sort of more important than Jesus. It basically refers to shall we call it, the idea or concept that believers will be removed from earth before Jesus comes back. That's what the rapture is about. There's a whole book and film franchise called Left Behind. They have made millions out of this concept, kind of writing these fanciful books about exactly what will happen. There we are. Well, the concept of the believers being removed from earth actually comes out of that passage that Sally read from 1 Thessalonians. But it's quite often misunderstood. In the New Testament, there are quite a few different terms that are used to describe the second coming, or that phrase is never used, or the return of Jesus. Sometimes just appearing, as we had in the Colossians, when the Lord appears. Here we actually have the word coming. Well, actually we don't. There's just one case where I disagree with the NIV. The NIV translates it coming, but the Greek word is actually more technical, and arrival would actually be more accurate, because it's a technical term that is used, or was used in antiquity, about the arrival of a great king or triumphant general or some sort of big dignitary. So when the emperor would come, or the emperor's representative would come, say to Redditch, for example, all the inhabitants would go out and line the roads, the A414 or whatever, 441, isn't it, going up to Birmingham, if we assume that it's coming from Birmingham. So all the inhabitants would go out, line the streets, and really welcome, sort of the way that happened at Palm Sunday when Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. that wasn't a unique event. It happened whenever a king or an emperor or somebody came to visit a town. Everybody would go out to meet them. And the word used by that is the word that has been translated coming here, arrival. So Paul is basically using the same image. He's using the image of Jesus arriving from heaven and his people going out, or in this case going up, to meet him. The passage does also talk about Jesus coming down, because we've talked about him going to heaven. We usually imagine heaven being above us, even though in a way it would be better to say the spiritual world, the spiritual sphere, which is sort of around us rather than above. Beyond might be better, but because we have this picture, Paul talks about Jesus coming down, and to be fair, when he left earth, he was lifted up from the ground for a while before he disappeared. It's quite possible that he will appear above ground as he descends and comes down. And it's quite possible that believers will sort of be lifted up to greet him as he comes down. A vertical welcome rather than the horizontal welcome that we would normally have. It's possible. But it could also just be a powerful image, a metaphor, a symbolic lifting, if you like, just to indicate that Jesus is coming back just like a king or an emperor or a general arriving, and we will be there to meet him. Because that's his main point. His main point isn't how and what. His main point is Jesus is coming back. And all the rest doesn't really matter. How it happens, well, I think we can leave that to him, can't we? Because we can't make it happen anyway. It's not like we're meant to kind of jump up to meet him. If we are to be lifted, he will do it. We'll find out. But the main point, this is my main point, and I think this is Paul's main point and the New Testament's main point in general, is that when Jesus comes back like this, that's the end. When Jesus returns as Lord and King, that is the end of the world. This is not going to happen secretly, and there's going to be all sorts of things happening after this has happened. When Jesus comes back, that's it. As C.S. Lewis puts it, when the author comes on stage, then you know that the play is over. When the author comes on stage, that's it. It's finished. When Jesus comes back, it's the end of the world as we know it. But it's quite important to notice those last words there. The end of the world as we know it. It's not the end of the world full stop. Because you notice what Paul said. It's very main point in this passage. So we will be with the Lord forever. That's his main point. And then he says, encourage each other, comfort each other with these words. We will be with the Lord forever. Because when Jesus comes back, it's not just the end of the world as we know it, it's also a beginning. Because this is why we have the passage from Revelation 21, the new heaven and the new earth, a restored creation for a restored humanity, something that the church forgot about for centuries. And it's only been sort of rediscovered in the last century or two, when we suddenly realized that it's the end of the current world, yes, but we want an end to this current world. This world is like a broken umbrella. It's full of wars and disease and illness and hatred and violence and all sorts of things. We want that to be got rid of. And Jesus coming back is the beginning of the new world, the new heaven and earth. God getting rid of the bad stuff, repairing the broken stuff, starting something new. Peter describes it like this. In keeping with his promise, we are looking forward, please note that, looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells. There isn't that much righteousness around in this world right now. The new heaven and earth will be full of it. And Paul tells us that all of creation is longing for this to happen. This is something that the world is looking forward to. Creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed, in hope that creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay. The world is broken, the world is breaking down, just like that umbrella. Something's gone wrong, but God will fix it. And one thing that has gone wrong, that's us. We've gone wrong. And one thing that went wrong is we became mortal. Our bodies break down. As soon as you're born, basically, you start your journey towards decay. And one day you'll be dead. That's not how God wanted it. This is what I realized, that I quite enjoy taking funerals. Because you can point this out. Yes, death is not the end. We became mortal, but that wasn't what God wanted. And therefore, resurrection is a really important part of the end times. Paul mentions it in 1 Corinthians, not 1 Corinthians, well, he does, but in the passage we just heard in 1 Thessalonians, talks about resurrection. The passage we heard from Revelation starts with everybody being returned from death, resurrection. Jesus' victory over death involves, I could almost say incorporates, if you know Latin, you know why I would like to say incorporates, because that you have the word body in there. Jesus' victory over death incorporates a reuniting of body and soul. That's what resurrection is about. The classic idea of salvation, which has been predominant for centuries, is this kind of idea of when you die, you're finally liberated from your body and your immaterial soul goes off to live in heaven forever. That is not biblical. That's not the eternal hope that the Bible tells us about. That's kind of what happens between death and resurrection. Your soul goes off to wait in heaven. But it's waiting for resurrection, the reuniting of body and soul. That is what salvation is about. The new creation is material. The new creation is a new earth inhabited by restored, resurrected, redeemed human beings. And that is great news. That is what the Bible has been looking forward to all along. But before we get there, there is something else that has to happen. Something that we don't enjoy talking about quite as much. I love talking about resurrection. I love talking about a new heaven and a new earth. I don't often talk about the final judgment. But most of us probably know that this is part of our faith. It is right there. And Revelation isn't the only place that talks about it. Jesus talks about it quite a bit in the Gospels. Why is the final judgment necessary? Well, for one thing, it's got to do with justice. Most people feel very strongly about justice. You see that you just have to look in the papers and social media, and people want to see justice done. It's not right that somebody should go unpunished or unsentenced. We want justice, and if we as Christians point out that even Hitler could be forgiven and saved if he repented, people don't like it, because he should get his just deserts. And you can put in wherever you like, other dictators are available. But a righteous God has to judge sin and evil, because otherwise he wouldn't be a righteous and just God. And part of that is, in order for the new earth, new heaven and new earth to be full of righteousness, he has to clear away all sinfulness from the existing world. Before he can press reset on creation, he has to get rid of all sinfulness from us, because he can't risk the same thing happening again. If I go out and buy a new umbrella, I don't want it to end up like that first one. He can't risk sin and evil sneaking into the new world. So he has to get rid of sinfulness, and of course, you know what's coming next. Who is righteous? Anybody here wanting to claim to be perfect, sinless, free of all sin and temptation and failure? I didn't think so. We're all tainted by sin. We're all born with a sinful nature. We all do things that are wrong. We have to admit that. Which is where the books come in. In Revelation 20, you may have noticed it talked about books. Books where everything we've done, and not just done, but thought and said, is written down. That would make a pretty scary reading, wouldn't it? And I think if that was in print, you wouldn't want anybody to find the one about your life, would you? I wouldn't anyway. And based on those books, we all deserve judgment. That's the thing, we've all fallen short. And as I like to say, if you have a white wedding dress, how many dirty thumbprints does it take to ruin a white wedding dress? Just one. So it doesn't matter how sinful you are or how much better you are than Hitler. I mean, I hope we are all a bit better than Hitler, right? But it doesn't matter, because we're all tainted. So based on those books, the books of our deeds, we all deserve judgment. Which is where the Lamb's Book of Life come into play. In this passage, it's just called the Book of Life, but a bit later, John refers to it as the Lamb's Book of Life. The Lamb is Jesus, right? The only way to get through the judgment is by trusting in what Jesus has done. To have your name written in Jesus' Book of Life. And that is based on faith, trusting in Jesus, asking him to deal with your sinful nature, asking him to forgive your sins and cleanse you from sinfulness. And I think that's quite important to point out when you read that passage in Revelation 20. Those that are condemned on the basis of what they've done, and justly so. But those that are saved because they've cast themselves on the mercy of Jesus and trusting in him. And of course, anybody can do that. Nobody can be saved through their own deeds, but everybody can be saved by what Jesus has done. So yes, here's a timeline. People like timelines when they talk about the end times, don't they? Jesus comes back, there's a final resurrection, there's a final judgment, and the new heaven and new earth, the new restored creation are kicked into place. As far as I understand, this all happens in one fell swoop, and that's it. So I'm not going to give you this, oh, you have this, and then 3 years later, and 5 years later, and 7 years later, and whatever. That's where the details come in that we disagree on. My understanding is that this all happens, and that's it. But you may have heard about other things. You may have heard about the millennium, or the Battle of Armageddon, or the Antichrist. I mean, those things are known even in secular culture, as evidenced by this clip from a very definitely non-Christian TV series called Good Omens.
Armageddon is days away, and we've lost the Antichrist.
Yeah, don't want to be in that situation, do you? Well, as I said, there's a lot of different ways of understanding those things. So I will only make 2 points when it comes to these details. The Battle of Armageddon is only mentioned in one place in Revelation. It doesn't even say Battle of Armageddon, and the battle never happens. There are armies gathering in a place called Armageddon. You never actually read about the battle. Quite important to be aware of that. And if the Antichrist is somebody who persecutes Christians, well, then we all know there have been a fair few of those already. All the way back to Nero and other Roman emperors, to Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot and Kim Jong-un in North Korea right now. And I think the main point when the Bible talks about this is not to kind of warn the final generation about some dictator that is going to come at the very end. The main point is to tell us there will be persecution whenever you live, wherever you live. Be on your guard, yes, but most of all, be prepared and stand firm. That's the main point of the book of Revelation. The main point isn't to sort of give you a lurid detail of what's going to happen at the end. It's to tell you, yes, there will be hardship. Yes, there may be persecution, but Jesus is coming back and he has already won. That's what the book of Revelation is all about. I may preach a sermon series through the book of Revelation at some point later on. But if I do, you already know what the main theme is going to be. Jesus and his victory. Which is why I'm going to end the sermon by highlighting something that I have already mentioned a few times, but people often don't realize it when they talk about the end times. And that is that the end of the world is good news. Paul ends that passage we heard with those words, encourage each other with these words. The purpose was to encourage the believers, not to scare them. The believers in Thessalonica were a bit worried because some believers had died, and that wasn't in the plan. They hadn't realized that might happen. They thought Jesus was going to come back fairly soon. Shows that even the early church got things wrong. And Paul encourages them, don't worry. It doesn't matter because Jesus has defeated death. So if some of us die before Jesus comes back, it's okay because Jesus will raise them up again. We don't have to worry. We will all be included when Jesus comes back. Have you heard of doomsday preppers? No? There's a lot of things you haven't heard about. They're people who are preparing for the end, as it were. But nobody knows from a Christian point of view, so they kind of store up food and water and things like that. There are even Christian websites that will sell you survival food at very inflated prices. Please don't fall for that. Because the only thing you have to do to prepare for the end of the world is to trust in Jesus. All you have to do is hold on to Jesus. Like we sang in that children's song, there's no looking back, I'm going to go, go, go. Hold on to Jesus, keep going with Jesus. God will restore creation to what it was meant to be, a beautiful habitat for beautiful human beings. Sinless, ex-sinful, we could say. Ex-sinful, sinless, redeemed, restored human beings in a wonderful world, freely worshipping their Creator, the way we were meant to be. And everything that is wrong in this current world will be sorted out and got rid of. That's good news. And all who want to be there are invited. All who want to be with Jesus will be there with Jesus. Because he died and rose again to make this possible. And that is good news. It is all just wonderful, great, good news. And he who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. And that includes us, sinful human beings. We can be made new through the power of Jesus, through the power of his blood and his resurrection, to live with him forever. Isn't that great? Let's pray together. Lord, I do get a bit carried away sometimes when I think about these things, what's coming. Not because I want to speculate about wars and rumors of wars, but because I want to be with you. And I want to see this world restored to what you intended for it to be. And I want to see this redeemed humanity worshipping before your throne. And I thank you that it's possible because of what you've done. So Lord, help us to revel in what you've done, to keep going, remembering that when you come back, you will be party time. Then when you come back, we will celebrate and rejoice because everything bad will be gone. And I thank you for that promise, that you will make everything new, including us. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Amen. I'm always happy to talk more about these things, so if anybody has questions, please come and find me or send me an email or arrange to meet up another time. But we are going to sing a final song which starts off with the fact that the world isn't quite as it should be, but moves on to the fact that Jesus is coming back. There will be a great celebration, and in the meantime we have a gospel to proclaim. So stand if you can, and let's sing together. Amen.